So in this series of videos, we're talking about OpenAI's newly released Assistants API. In part one of the video, we demonstrated how to give it your own proprietary files and have your chatbot respond to user questions that fetches information from that proprietary knowledge store. In this video, we're going to take it one step further and talk about how to make it call agents. And it does that by using this functionality called function calling. And if you haven't watched the first video, I recommend that you do that first, because this is going to take it one step further and it's a little bit more complicated. So the example that we're going to take you through is building a tool that a customer service team can use to execute some back-end tasks that's needed to support a gaming app. So for example, there are times when we have the email address of a user and we need to fetch the user's user ID. In another case, we might want to directly email a user with some messages, but we only have the user's user ID. And then the third case is a user might have purchased a subscription to the game through some other channels, and we need to manually give that user a membership by dropping it into their account. And in the past, we had to create some very specialized tools that talks to the database and then train the customer service team on how to use these tools. But here we're thinking we can use this to just let the customer service agents type in what they need to do and have it done on the back end. So that's what we're going to walk through. So it's the setup is quite similar to the retrieval mode. So you've got an assistant that has a name and a description, and you define the underlying LLM model that supports your assistant. You might have some files. In this case, we uploaded an FAQ that the customer service agents often refer to. We gave it some extra tools. So in the part one video, we only gave it the retrieval tool. But in fact, you can give assistants up to 128 different tools. And the tools can be something that you create as proprietary to your own company. So in this case, we're giving the assistant access to 3 tools that's unique to our business. One is being able to fetch the user ID when given an email address. Second one is being able to easily send a single email by giving it the user ID and the message. And thirdly, to enable customer service agents to give a subscription to a user manually. So we set that up, and then we likewise create an empty thread, and then the user message. First user message might be something like, please tell me the user ID of a user that has an email address blah 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 at gmail.com. And so that message would be run together with the assistant. And unlike the retrieval mode where it would run and then it will complete, and then you will find the message inside the thread, which you can read out and pass it back to the user, here we have an extra step. So you will see when you poll the run status that if the model feels that the user message can only be answered by using some of these tools, what it will do is to put run status into something called requires action mode and pause there. And once you see require action, that is a note to tell you that you need to do something now. So you can basically retrieve something called tool calls from the run process. And within the tool call is an array. And within each item in the array are 3 things. One is the tool call ID. Second one is the function name. And 3 is the parameters array. So what does this mean? It means that in the case that I mentioned just now, the user is asking for the user ID given an email address. So the assistant would think about it and would be like, oh, I can't answer this question myself, but I do have a tool called fetch user ID. So I'm going to set my run status to requires action. And then I'm going to have a tool call array of one function call. And this would be some kind of unique ID. The function name would be fetch user ID. And the parameters array would be like a key value pair. So it would be, the key would be email, and then the value would be the actual email address that the customer service agent provided. And once you have this information, you will through your own code, call your own APIs, pass the parameters in, and once your APIs respond with an output, you will then store this in an array and then pass it back to the run process. And once the run process feels like it's got everything that it needs, it will then set the status to completed, and then put assistant message back into the thread, at which point you can read it out and show it back to the user. So this might sound a little bit abstract, but it'll become a lot more clear when we want to run through the worked example. So here we're going to walk through a demo of the Assistants API using the agent functionality, aka function calling. So as usual, we just install and set up the packages in our Google Colab environment. And then we will have to set our organization ID and API key. So basically this cell contains my credentials. Yours you should put here and then run this cell instead. And then you will complete the authentication process, and you have a client object to work with. So just like the previous video, if you wanted to give your assistant some files that it can retrieve information from, you can do that. In this case, we're passing it a PDF that has a customer service FAQ. Okay. So we've uploaded that file, and now we're setting that file ID to a variable called file ID. So we've given it some files as a resources. The second part that we're going to do, which we didn't do in the previous video, is to give it some additional resources in the form of functions. So here we're going to define 3 functions. And let me talk you through it step by step. So function 1 is called give manual IAP. IAP stands for in-app purchase. So what the function does is that it takes in a user ID, a product ID, and the number of months that the subscription should last. And it allows our customer service to manually drop a membership subscription into the user's account. And so we have 3 parameters. So in order to call this API, we need these 3 things. One is the user ID, and it's a string, and it is the user ID of the user who should receive the subscription. The second thing that we need is something called a product ID. So it is the type of subscription that we want to give them. Again, it's a string. So there are 3 types of membership levels in our app. There's silver tier, gold tier, or gold plus tier membership, blah, blah, blah. And there are only 3 options here. So we also specify that in this array, there's silver tier, gold tier, or gold plus tier. And finally, we also need to know how many months we want to this subscription to last for. So the type is an integer, and the description is the number of months the subscription should last for. And all of these parameters are required. So that's the first function that we give the assistant. The second function is called send single email. So this function takes in a user ID or an email, a subject line, and a body text, and it sends an email to the address corresponding to the user ID or directly to the email address provided. And then here we have a number of parameters. So we can take the user ID, or we can take an email. We need the subject line, and the body of the email. And here we said that only the subject, text body, oh, sorry, that's a mistake. Text body are required because the user ID and email are, we only need one of the two. So let's just run this. This actually doesn't do anything. We're just assigning these details into this variable, which we will use later on when we actually create the assistant. So the third function is to fetch a user ID. Sometimes our customer service receives an email from a customer and it needs to, using the email, find the user ID of that user to be able to look up information. So the name of this function is called fetch user ID. It's a function that takes in a user's email and returns the user's user ID. And the parameters is very simple. It only has one. And the parameter is email, and it's a string, and it's the email address of the user, of whom we would like to retrieve the user ID. Yep, and then that's a required parameter. So let's run that. So now we pull it all together, the files, the functions, and we create the assistant. So the assistant has a name called the Maui Stars app customer service tool. And the instructions are, you are a chatbot designed to help customer service agents of a game complete administrative tasks such as giving a user a membership subscription manually, fetching the user's user ID based on their email address, and also sending the user an email. And then we've selected the model here. And within tools, you can see that we've given it the retrieval tool, and we've also given it these 3 functions. And so if you have more, you can just list it out here. And the OpenAI Assistants API is intelligent to decide which of these functions it needs to call in order to complete the task. And finally, it has an array of file IDs as well. So this is the additional customer service FAQ document that I'm also giving it. Okay, so this cell below, we're not going to, I'm gonna run this. This cell below, we're not going to run. We only need to run it if we need to update any of the configurations. So here it's been created and it's returned the assistant ID. And if you're going into this code a second time and you just want to use an assistant that you've already created, then you don't need to do all the stuff that I talked about before. You just need to retrieve your assistant using the ID. But we're not going to dive into that here. So now we create an empty thread. And we have a thread ID, and you can see that it's empty. Now we want to add a user message to the thread. So we're going to pretend that we're a customer service agent, and we're going to ask, what is the user ID of a user with the email testtest@gmail.test. Okay, so now that first message has been added to the thread. Now we're going to run this thread together with our assistant. Okay, so now we've set that run process going. In the next step, we're going to poll the run process to see what kind of status it is in. And we can see here, unlike the retrieval, where it says in progress and then it says completed, we now have a status called requires action. It means we need to do something. So step 7, if the run status is required action, it means we need to call the agents because these are our APIs, right? OpenAI has no access to those APIs. So what we need to do is to first go into the run process and to retrieve something called tool calls. Tool calls is basically the assistant telling us which functions we need to call and what parameters we need to pass in. So let's just run that. So here I've printed out how many tools they want me to call, because actually you can, within a single query, maybe it needs to call multiple APIs to get all the information needed to respond to the user. In this case, just to keep it simple, it's only asked for one, because and that makes sense because with the query that we wrote, it should be telling us that we need the fetch user ID function. And then we also printed the details of the tools to call. So you can see that's an array. And then within the array, there's something called a tool call ID. And then it's telling us that we need to call a function named fetch user ID. And these are the parameters, the arguments that we should pass into it. So in a normal situation, you might have more than one tool that you need to call. So what we're going to do here is just to loop through each of those tool calls to see, we're going to parse out like the tool call ID, what the name of the function that we need to call, and then pull out the arguments. And then there should be some code here that calls the right APIs. So for example, if in the first loop, the Assistant API told us to use the fetch user ID and to pass it an email to fetch the user ID, then we need to be doing, calling this. Otherwise, it might want to call a different API or the third API. And I haven't implemented this, but basically what it's going to do here is just to call an API and then get the return, like results. And here we've kind of faked it by hard coding in the output and also some outputs here just for testing. And you'll notice here that I created this thing called the tool output array. So what we're doing is every time we loop through this, we're storing an object into this array, which is the tool call ID and the output. And this will make it a lot easier for us to give all the results back to the run process in one go. So okay, let me just run this. Okay, so you'll see that we only need to make one function call here, and the function that we're being told to call is the fetch user ID, and the parameters to pass into that API is this. And then here we printed out the output, which is we associate the output of this with the tool call ID. So now that we've done that, we need to pass this output back to the run process. We're going to do that. Okay. And then we're going to check the run operation again. Oh, now it's completed. So now that the run process is completed, we're going to pull out all the messages from the thread and we're going to print it out. So you can see here, this was our original user query. What is the user ID of a user with email testtest@gmail.test? And then the assistant comes back with the user ID of the user with email address testtest@gmail.test is blah, 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 blah. So that's pretty much how it works. So let's kick the tires a little bit more. What if I ask something in my second query as a user that doesn't involve any of the functions at all? It only requires information from the file that I gave it. Let's see, what is the difference between purchasing a membership from you directly versus via the app stores? Okay, let's write that into the thread, and then we run the thread. Then we retrieve the run status. So it's saying it's in progress, and now it's completed. So we don't need step 7, and we don't need to return results to the run operation. We can just And we also don't need to do that because we just did it. So then we will now just retrieve the messages from the run process and print it out. So here we go. So this was our first question and answer. This is our second question that we just wrote. And the answer is, the difference between purchasing a membership directly from us compared to buying through apps has 3 main benefits. Discounts on subscriptions, device flexibility. So it works across both Apple and Android devices, an easy refund process. Perfect. So it doesn't, there's no way it could have gotten this information without reading the file. So you can see how it's able to cope with both agents and also files separately. Let's see, let's try one more. Okay, let's ask it a question that requires a different function. So let's say, please help me to send an email to a user with user ID XXXXXX with the subject line let's see, please change your password, and the body text as blah blah blah. Okay. Okay, and then we're gonna run it, and then we're going to retrieve the run status. See, now this one, it's telling us that it requires an action, so we need step 7. Let's pull out the tool calls to see which tool it wants us to call. So here, it's only one tool that's required, and it's telling us that we need a function called send single email. So here, we're going to loop through this tools to call, and we know it's only going to run one loop because it's only telling us to call one function. But let's have a look. So here you can see it's given us a tool ID. This is useful for when we want to pass back the output from our API back to the run process, so it knows what matches up with what. The function to call is called send single email, and the parameters it told us to use is, so it extracted this from the user's query, the user ID, the subject line, and the text body. And then it basically went in and called this fake API, and then the API returned true, which means the email has been sent successfully. So we've now created this tool output array here, which we're going to pass back to the run process in step 8. So let's do that. And then step 9, we're going to check the run process again, and now it's complete. So now we're going to retrieve all the messages from the thread, and then we're going to print it out. Cool. So you can see this is what we wrote. Please help me to send an email to a user with user ID blah 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 with the subject line blah blah blah, and the body text is blah blah blah. And then the assistant came back to us and said the email with the subject line blah 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 and the body text has been successfully sent to the user with the user ID XXX. So now you can see how that works. In part 3 of the video, we will show more complicated examples that requires calling more than one function in each run.